Hello and welcome to the Yes You Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Anna Manning, and you're listening to episode 47, How to Be a Good Supervisor, Manager and Leader. Open brackets to yourself, close brackets. I know that's a rather long-winded title, but the reason that I'm doing this podcast, the reason that that's come about this week is because I started a LinkedIn newsletter. So if you're not already connected with me on LinkedIn, come and connect with me there. I love doing stuff on LinkedIn. I love being on LinkedIn, and I like it as a way to kind of connect with people and share these ideas and the stuff that we talk about on the podcast. So I started this LinkedIn newsletter, and it's about changing internal culture, because I was getting kind of annoyed that all people ever think about or talk about is culture, our workplace culture, in terms of the external. So let's create a good workplace culture by how we work with each other. And I'm like, there's a big missing piece in this equation, which is how do we create a good internal culture within ourselves? And when I was thinking about that and writing about it within the newsletter, it got me thinking about something that I have talked about before, which is the fact that we are our closest supervisor, manager, and leader throughout our career. So it doesn't matter if you change jobs, it doesn't matter if you switch industries, it doesn't matter if you get another promotion. Your closest supervisor, manager, and leader is coming with you. You. Think about it. You're the one that goes to every single meeting with you. You're the one that's there through every single thing that you attempt. You're the one that goes with you to every presentation. You're the one that looks over every piece of work that you start. You're the one that gets yourself out of bed on a bad day. You're the one that talks to yourself constantly about what you're doing and how you're doing it. You're the one that feeds back to you most often. You're the one. I work with a lot of very successful professionals. And the one thing that everybody, and me included, right? I'll tell you a little bit about my journey with this too. But the one thing that everybody has in common when I coach with them is that we usually have to take a good, sometimes hard, sometimes messy look at how is that person supervising, managing, and leading themselves. Because most often I coach nice, good people, right? And I'm sure if you're listening to this, you're a nice, good person too. They lead people one way. They manage people one way. They supervise people one way. And they lead and manage themselves in a completely different way. Not usually as good. And they don't really think of it in those terms. And you probably haven't been thinking of it in those terms either. But today I'm going to ask you, right, really think about it in those terms. Imagine that you have a manager, a supervisor, or a leader, or a boss, whatever, however you want to think of it, that is part of you, right? But it's that bit that's living in your head, that's watching over what you're doing, that's commenting on what you're doing, that might be criticizing what you're doing, that might be doubting what you're doing, that might be bashing you over the head for getting things wrong. And maybe it's not all like that. Maybe it's giving you some great feedback or acknowledging you for good things that you've done. Maybe it's reminding you to close your laptop and go home because it's 6 p.m. I don't know what the internal supervisor, manager, leader in your head is like. But do you know what they're like? For most people that I work with, the way they manage and lead themselves has never really come to their conscious awareness. Yeah, sure, it's been happening their entire career. They've been dealing with themselves in certain ways. But the idea that they are managing, leading, and supervising themselves hasn't generally occurred to people. But when I look with them at some of the things that they might be experiencing at work or some of the challenges that they might be having, this internal manager, this internal leader is never very far away. And I'm guessing that yours probably isn't either. So, what I notice is that pretty poor standards in terms of the way we lead and manage ourselves is kind of the norm. And I'm not saying that this is how it is for everyone, but it seems to me from the work I do that it's kind of the norm. And it seems that poor leadership of ourselves is such a normal part of our working life that it's like background noise that nobody even notices. So, for instance, somebody will tell me, yeah, you know what? I was giving myself a hard time before I went to do that difficult thing. And then I was giving myself a hard time during it. And then I really gave myself a hard time after it. And there's an example of the boss that lives in their head. That's how they're leading and managing themselves by giving themselves a hard time before something, giving themselves a hard time during it, and then giving them a really hard time afterwards. And for most people, until I draw that to their attention, they haven't really noticed, or they have noticed, right? Because they know what the impact of that is. They know it frazzles them before, it stops them from saying what they need to say during, and it gets in their way, and it makes them feel really terrible afterwards. Like, actually, they know that, but it often takes me to point it out for them to really see it and be like, okay. And the one thing I always do is try to like make it external so that they can see what an impact that might be having on them. And if this is you, if you do this, as I'm talking about what this will be like externally, just answer the question, what would this be like for you? So imagine you're going to do a big thing and you have a boss that is giving you a really hard time before you go and do it. Then they're really like getting in your way during it, saying stuff, pointing stuff out that isn't going well, and then afterwards they beat you up and give you a really hard time. Imagine that. Imagine working in that kind of culture. And you know what? I'm sorry for you if you have, because I know that some people have. But for most of us, we are working in that kind of culture. I hope for you that your actual boss isn't like that. But if the boss in your head is like that, you are working in that kind of culture. Kind of brings me back to what I was saying at the beginning. People talk about culture as being this external thing, but they ignore the fact that we create an internal culture that we work within 24/7 at every job, at every place we go through our entire career. We are creating this like environment and this ecosystem inside ourselves by leading and managing ourselves in one way or another. And that environment that you're creating might be nurturing and it might be supportive and it might be encouraging, or as unfortunately seems to most often be the case, it might be an absolute toxic nightmare. So there's a lot of talk about like well-being and resilience, and I'm doing these in air quotes, right? Because everyone banging on buzzwords annoy me at the best of times, and everyone banging on about it is like, what do those words even mean? I don't know if anyone actually knows what they mean. But think about it in terms of the internal boss that you have. So think about it in terms of the way you're leading and managing yourself. Is that contributing to your well-being? Does the way you manage yourself help you to feel more resilient when things go wrong? Workplaces could do everyone a favor by helping them to learn about the way that they lead and manage themselves, and helping you to lead and manage yourself in a way that is conducive to you actually showing up at work as the happier, more like well-being / more resilient version of you. But they can't because they don't know about it. And they haven't thought about it for the most part. Even like I talk to a lot of HR and organizational development people, and they kind of look at me like, what are you? Oh, wow. That is something that I'd never even thought of before. And I'm like, yeah. And it's kind of obvious when you think about it. Or maybe it's obvious to me because I sit in front of people and I coach them day in, day out, and I have been doing for years. And what I see over and over again is that when somebody is being managed, supervised, and led by themselves in a way which is critical, very demanding, very doubting, not very understanding, has very high standards, gives very little good feedback or acknowledgement, they are not going to be as happy at work as they could be. They're going to be more scared. They're going to be more anxious. They're going to feel more like giving up more often. They might even lose their love for their work. And that's even people who just love what they do. They'll doubt themselves more. They'll procrastinate. They'll triple check stuff they don't need to. They won't feel like they can talk about what they're doing because, God forbid, they should boast. They might not even apply for a promotion that they should. They'll be less confident than they should be, or than you think they should be. They might even decide, you know what, I'm not cut out for this type of environment because I'm too nice or too sensitive or whatever. People can quit jobs that even seemingly seem okay on the outside because of what is going on the inside, because their internal boss is a nightmare. But often this is a very, like, I'm going to call it a silent killer. Work, if this is you, work might be getting everything from you they could possibly want. You may be a model employee, but inside, what is the price that you're paying for that? When you're working within this kind of regime, with this kind of leader in your mind, if you care about your own well-being, then take a close look at your supervisor, at your manager, at your leader. You. I shared in that LinkedIn newsletter about if I'd been asked for feedback on my own, well, me as my manager, my leader, my supervisor, like the boss that lived in my head, if I'd been asked in the past for feedback about her, what would I have said? And I just wrote this off the cuff, but here it is. I would have said, she criticizes me all the time. She doubts my abilities and my skills. She expects me to power through on difficult days and expects me to carry on like nothing's happened. She sets high standards, then criticizes me for not always being able to reach them. She compares me to other people and berates me if I make a mistake for weeks. She rarely acknowledges me for the work that I do, and I generally don't get good feedback even when I have done good work. That's the feedback that I would have given if somebody had asked me, Anna, tell us about your closest supervisor, manager, and leader, the one who lives within you, the one who's there all the time, who watches over you and comments on the stuff that you do at work. What is she like? That is what I would have told them. Maybe they would have been mortified. But do you know what? Nobody ever asked me that question. And I bet no one else has ever asked you that question either. We are not accustomed to thinking about how we're handling ourselves. We're only accustomed to thinking about how we handle everyone else. We have a problem. We're supposed to give of ourselves and treat everybody else in a certain way. And everyone's forgotten that there's us inside that may be getting treated really, really badly, like I was. I was getting treated terribly. But no one ever asked me. And maybe I didn't sort of even realize that that was a bad thing that was happening to me. And maybe I sort of didn't realize that there was actually anything I could do about it or that there was any other way, except there was. And if you've never really noticed before this podcast episode that you're working within this kind of internal culture, if you've never really noticed that you, the boss, the leader, the manager, the supervisor that lives within you, treats you badly, you would be forgiven for not noticing. Because most of the time when I'm working with clients, they have never noticed either. And I had never noticed. I went through like 15 years of my career treating myself like absolute terrible. And I sort of never noticed. It's a very weird thing. Even though I noticed the impact of it. I used to get scared more before I did stuff. I used to over prepare stuff. I used to get more panicky. I would always say yes to things, right? I wasn't one of those people that would say no, but then I would freak out about it. I'd give myself a hard time. I was terrible if I ever made a mistake. I used to compare myself to people. I would criticize myself constantly, be like doubting myself. I would ignore what I was feeling, expect myself to power through. I spent loads of time like trying to mollycoddle, whatever that is, the voice in my head instead of actually just being able to be present and being where I was. And I was quite a confident person. And yet all of that was still going on inside me. And do you know what? I wish to God that I used to be a manager, right, in my various jobs. And there would be feedback from my direct reports as part of my yearly appraisal cycle. And people would feedback and say what it's like to work for Anna and blah, blah, blah. But I wish to God somebody had thought to include that question of me too, to say, Anna, what is it like to work for the boss that's inside your head? Because then maybe I would have realized, oh, do you know what? It's actually really shit. She criticizes me all the time. She doubts me. She ignores the fact that I'm feeling emotional. She sets really high standards. She criticizes me terribly if I do anything wrong. She doesn't really acknowledge me very much for the work that I do. She's a nightmare. I wish to God that had been part of my appraisal process. Because it's actually really, really important. You can't expect well-being and you can't expect resilience when you or your staff or whoever are being treated like that on the inside. And let me tell you, loads of people are walking around in your workplace being treated like that on the inside, and nobody's talking about it. So I'm talking about it. I'm going to stand on some roofs and I'm going to shout about it, and I'm going to write my little LinkedIn newsletter. I'm going to share it with as many people as possible because I think that this is really important. I think you deserve to be treated well by the boss that lives in your head, even if you're not now. And I know that it can actually change. I work with clients all the time that transform their internal environment, that transform their internal culture. And the way they do that is by taking a really honest look at how they're leading and managing themselves right now and making a decision about how they actually want to lead and manage themselves. And that decision isn't based on what I want for them. That decision's based on what they want for them. So if they tell me, you know what, Anna, I want to feel quite confident at work. I want to enjoy my job and I want to feel confident to do and say what I like. I'm like, okay, what kind of a boss would you need in order to make that happen? And they say stuff like, I would need somebody who treated me with respect. I would need somebody who helped me to get learnings from things that I did wrong, but didn't berate me, and someone who supported me. And I would need, the good stuff to be pointed out. I'd need to be acknowledged for that. I'd need to not be compared. The standards would need to be appropriate. I'd need someone, to just notice sometimes that I can't work at 100% all of the time, but, I am going to give my best. And I'd need somebody who reminded me sometimes when I'm doubting myself that I am good at what I do and I'm here for a reason. Sorry, this is turning into a bit of a rant, isn't it? But they tell me that's what they would need from a boss in order to get what they want, which is like, oh, I want to feel more confident. I want to enjoy my job, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, so what we need to do is take a look at what the manager and supervisor in your head is currently doing. And then we need to start shifting it from what it's currently doing to what you just told me that your boss needs to be like in order for you to feel confident and happier at work. And you know what? It really isn't rocket science. It is completely doable. I did it. I do it with clients all the time. It isn't rocket science. If you've only been focused on how you supervise or manage or lead others or how you work with other people, why don't you think about refocusing a little closer to home? There is a worker in you who is being led and supervised by you and will be forever. And they might have some feedback for you about how you've been doing. They might have some feedback for you about how you're currently leading and managing them. Might not be very easy to look at, but I promise you it'll be worthwhile. So ask yourself, or maybe jot it down. What feedback do you have for me about how I've been leading and managing you? Include yourself within the list of people who deserve to be well supervised and well managed and well led by you. It's only fair. And if you want my help to take a close look at how you're being supervised and managed and led by you right now, then I'm running the Grow Your Confidence Masterclass again at the end of June. I take you through exercises in that class that are designed to show you exactly the kind of manager, leader, and supervisor you need in order to be at your best at work. So if you want to kind of dive into this a bit more practically, that is where I recommend you start. And if you're leading? All right, I'll go with that. If you're leading other people, I challenge you to not only ask them about how they're working and leading with others, if you're into appraisal season or if you're having one-to-ones with people, I challenge you to ask them about this. I want to spread the word, and maybe you can help me. Because the people that you work with, maybe the people you lead and manage, will be being treated one way or another by their internal boss. And maybe if you're the boss and now you know, it's worth checking that out with them. Because I'll bet you to God nobody has asked them before. I'll bet you no one's even thought about it to ask them before. And I bet they've never thought about it either. But this is the starting point for real well-being at work. This is the starting point for real resilience. When people are led and supervised and managed really, really well, they can cope with things that are difficult and hard, and they can deal with challenges and setbacks and all the rest of it. They can take risks and they can innovate. But that boss needs to be right on the inside as well as on the outside for all of those things to happen. And we've been missing it. So you can help spread the word so that people don't keep missing this anymore. Also, if you want to come and do this work with me, you can book a call. The link is in the show notes. Either I can come and help you work out how to do this with your organization, for your team, for your department, whatever. But I can also do it with you one-on-one. I'll leave the link in the show notes. All right, people. That is all I have for you today. I really enjoyed this episode. Thank you for staying with me. Thank you for being in the podcast community. And I will see you in next week's episode. Bye.